All right. Kia ora, welcome. I see this number is still growing. Let's get everybody a chance to get on and join us for this session. Okay. All right, well, we have an incredible session for everyone. We want to get right into it. Want to give everyone time to be a part of it, but let's get this knowledge and exciting conversation going. Welcome to the Pacific Nature Conference session on deep connections, Pacific communities, and deep sea mining. The questions we'll be exploring will be around what do we know about the impacts of seabed mining? Why are informed communities throughout the Pacific joining a global chorus of voices saying no to this industry progressing? What is required from our leaders and institutions when considering this issue? And finally, where to from here? The speakers today will provide some answers and considerations to these questions. We have a multitude and a diversity of speakers throughout the Pacific. Kia ora, my name is Tina McKenzie. I'm the president of Te Opakaria Society. I live here in Rarotonga Cook Islands, and welcome to this session. Nice to have you all here virtually. We're going to begin this session with a video that was created for us by Dr. Diva Amon. She's the deep sea biologist. She's world-renowned. Let's begin with what she has to say and work from there. Thank you very much. Sorry, everyone. We've got to reset that. It doesn't look like the audio is coming through. Apologies for that. Let's just click that audio box. Thanks, Nat. How are we doing there?
Sorry about that, Tona. You weren't getting audio, right?
Correct, no audio.
Okay, right, okay. I'll just set it again.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Hello, my name is Dr. Diva Amon, and I'm a deep sea biologist. With the prospect of deep seabed mining increasing, especially here in the Pacific, I'd like to share with you why the deep ocean and its inhabitants are so important and how they might be impacted by this emerging industry. Earth is a blue planet with over 65% of its surface covered by oceans deeper than 200 meters. And while 99% of that deep ocean has never been visited or seen, we know that just like in the shallows and on land, there are a variety of habitats that are home to uniquely adapted species. There are staggering diversity of corals, seamounts that dwarf the tallest mountains on land, and 30-meter high chimneys that gush superheated black fluid and provide insights into the origins of life on Earth, just to name a few. The deep ocean is not only a massive reservoir of biodiversity, but its great size provides ecosystem functions and services that keep our planet healthy and keep us alive. It regulates our climate by sequestering carbon and absorbing heat. It cycles nutrients and plays a role in detoxification. And we depend on the ocean for millions of tons of food and thousands of jobs, especially here in the Pacific. And it's fast becoming a source of resources, including genetic materials and cures for diseases. And of course, it is a place of immense cultural importance and provides unending inspiration. The deep ocean pushes boundaries, it breaks paradigms, and perhaps it can provide solutions to some of the world's greatest future challenges. And the deep ocean is also being considered as a potential source of minerals, especially here in the Pacific. Polymetallic nodules these are potato-sized accretions of metal that sit on the sea floor like cobbles on a street, found on plains at over 3 kilometers depth, but between up to 6.5 kilometers depth. And then there are polymetallic sulfides found at hydrothermal vents on mid-ocean ridges between 1 and 4 kilometers depth. And finally, there are cobalt-rich crusts on seamounts between 1 and 2.5 kilometers depth. And as you can see, each of these resources is being targeted for different key metals. But these mineral resources are found in deep sea habitats with unique species living in each. The top video shows the abyssal seafloor of the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, a vast region stretching from Hawaii to Mexico. And research here is showing that there is very high biodiversity. Thousands of species have been collected, with 70 to 90% of those new to science. We've also found that more than half of the large species rely on the nodules themselves. Corals, anemones, and sponges, they use them as homes. And of course, that's the exact resource that's going to be removed. The bottom left video shows cobalt-rich crusts on seamounts, and this imagery is from the West Pacific, where you can see them coating the seafloor. Seamounts are extremely productive, often with dense corals and sponges that act like trees, providing three-dimensional habitat that houses lots of other life. And some of these corals and sponges are some of the oldest animals on the planet, with many aged over 4,000 years old. And of the three environments where mining may take place, this is the least well-known. And of course, on the bottom right, we have polymetallic sulfides found at hydrothermal vents. These are areas where superheated chemical and metal-rich fluid gush from the seafloor, forming chimneys and powering ecosystems. And as you can see, they are swarming with life that have unusual adaptations and provide clues as to how life evolved on this planet. And while the resources differ, the mining processes in all three habitats will be quite similar. Machines will remove the resource from the seafloor, it will be pumped to the surface where a ship will be waiting, there it will be dewatered, and then the waste will be released back into the ocean. And of course, that process will cause damage. There'll be destruction and removal of the resource, which is often the habitat, and all life in the direct path of the machines will be killed. There'll be sediment plumes like dust storms kicked up by machines, which could travel many kilometers vertically and horizontally, leading to a footprint which extends way beyond the actual mining operation and could result in smothering, blinding, and toxicity impacts to many of the animals. And then there'll be light and noise pollution that these animals would never have experienced in their entire life. And small-scale experiments are showing us that really deep-sea habitats do not recover quickly. For instance, for nodules and crusts, recovery would not occur for millions of years, as that's how long those resources take to reform, preventing many of the species from returning in that time. And even though we now know more than we ever had about the deep ocean, we should not be complacent. We sometimes forget that we're still in a discovery phase. The overused expression of knowledge gaps really doesn't convey the fundamental knowledge that we lack. These gaps include basic questions like what species live where, And how do they eat? And how do they reproduce? And what are their functions? Questions about their ecology. And then we have bigger questions about the functions of these ecosystems and how those functions actually work and how then they provide us with the services that we rely on. And while we expect many of the impacts from the previous slide, there are still many unknowns surrounding the severity of these impacts. And that's because there's been no test mining on the spatial scale or full intensity or duration that commercial mining may occur on. And so we don't know how far impacts will spread, how long they will last, what the likelihood of species extinctions will be, especially for the fauna that rely on resources. And we don't know what the impacts will be on ecosystem services. Will they impact fisheries? And will metals end up within the food web and within the seafood that we rely on? For instance, will the ocean's ability to sequester carbon be compromised? We don't know. And we don't really understand the impacts of deep seabed mining will have. And so if that's the case, how are we supposed to understand how those impacts might interact with other stresses, things like climate change, pollution? So really we need more time, effort, and resources to continue collecting essential baseline data and gaining a much better understanding of these vitally important parts of our planet. Because that's what we need to make informed decisions and ultimately manage and protect our deep oceans more effectively. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Good to hear from one of our sisters from the islands of the Caribbean. We're going to move now to a video that was sent in by our very own Reverend James Bhagwan from Suva, Fiji. James Bhagwan, Rev, is the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches, and he'll also be speaking on behalf of the Pacific Regional Civil Society. We'll hear from him now. Thank you.
Nisambula Vinaka, and greetings from Suva, Fiji, where the Pacific Conference of Churches Secretariat is based, along with many other regional civil society organizations. It is my honor and my task today to share a Pacific collective position on deep sea mining. That is, it is not needed, it is not wanted, and it is not consented. As Pacific Island people, we acknowledge that the ocean is the living blue heart of our planet. It is our common heritage, but also our common responsibility. We are its guardians. We recognize its significance and its essence as the basis of our Pacific identity and well-being. We are the ocean. In its preservation, we are preserved. For millennia, our ancestors have held this mantle of stewardship, embedding the wisdom of their resource management and conservation practices into their culture and traditions. Their vision was always beyond their temporal needs. The survival and well-being of future generations was central to their view of the world. So as custodians of the responsibility to protect the ocean against exploitation and destruction in our time, we as Pacific Islanders have a sacred and long-standing legacy to uphold. Our forebears have on this frontier stood firm against the ruinous incursions of nuclear testing, of drift net fishing and bottom trawling and marine pollution. And against impossible odds, they united to move a world to adopt a nuclear ban treaty, a ban on drift net fishing, and the London Dumping Convention. Awareness of the connection between climate change and the health of our oceans gathers momentum globally. Deep sea mining is the latest in a long list of destructive industries to be thrust into our sacred ocean. It is a new, perilous frontier extractive industry which is being falsely promoted as a proven answer to our economic needs. And while its promised benefits remain speculative, its pursuit is insidious. Even at an experimental stage, deep sea mining is already proving harmful to Pacific communities. And we of Oceania call for a total ban on deep sea mining within our territorial waters and in areas beyond national jurisdiction. We are mindful of the nuclear legacy in the Pacific, and we are determined not to repeat it. And so our ocean must never be used as the proving or testing grounds for the interests of powerful governments and industry. Rich governments promoting their multinational companies have been working with our own Pacific Island governments, enticing them with promises of wealth, despite technologies for extracting minerals on the ocean floor remaining untested in terms of environmental safety. Land-based mining also came with the promise of economic, social, and environmental benefits for our people. And our lived experience in the Pacific show clearly that the powerful corporations benefit the most, while it is our people who bear the costs of destruction of our natural environment. Across resource frontiers of our region, history records this deception time and again. Again, the corporations and their government backers advocating deep sea mining promise great wealth from the unexplored depths of our ocean. Their claim that deep sea mining impacts will be minimal is even more audacious given the fact that very little is known, let alone understood, about the ecologies of our oceans. So clearly, this is yet another attempt by these actors to frame the discussion and set the rules to suit their interests. And so we call on our Pacific governments and the international community to stand once again for the right side of history. That which is actually known about our ocean depths actually run contrary to the push for deep sea mining. And scientists regularly warn against the devastating and irreversible damage to ecosystems and habitats, the resulting biodiversity loss, including of many known endemic species and others yet to be identified, that will be affected and most likely will never recover. The risk of giant sediment plumes traveling beyond the mining sites, smothering and potentially destroying all life forms on the seafloor. The danger of wastewater plumes, including potential toxins lethal to marine life, discharged from the mothership, impacting ocean ecosystems at various depths with attendant risk to our already threatened fisheries. The risk of toxins entering our food chain via contaminated fisheries, and the potential of devastating oil spills from vessels occur. Pacific governments keen to pursue deep sea mining have to ask themselves, to what extent are they willing to destroy the ocean's life support system during a time of climate and planetary emergency, and in what is commonly known as the age of extinction? Our governments must ask themselves, who stands to gain the most from the destruction of our oceans? And furthermore, scientists acknowledge the critical carbon sequestration functions of deep sea hydrothermal vents and methane seeps, and are cautioning that the release of these sequestered methane, which is a greenhouse gas thought to be 25 to 50 times more potent than carbon dioxide, could be a doomsday climactic event. The health of our oceans is already under unprecedented threats, including from a multitude of human-induced stressors such as overfishing, pollution, plastics, nuclear waste and radioactive material, and climate emergency, along with related impacts such as ocean acidification and the warming of the oceans. To mask their greed, proponents are attempting to greenwash deep sea mining by arguing that seabed minerals are necessary for so-called green technology and to enable the global transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Now, this is a spurious argument, as the minerals we need can come from better recycling efforts and existing land-based resources. It would be ironic if the leaders of the Pacific Island countries, which are already at the forefront of the impacts of climate change and facing existential threats to territorial integrity, allow themselves to be persuaded to mine the ocean floor, thereby pushing the world into that doomsday scenario. Although our own governments and industry actors have argued that deep sea mining and its resources, mineral resources and mining of these resources are entirely the provenance of the state, states are still required to obtain the free, prior, and informed consent of the people, particularly indigenous peoples, over any development activities that would adversely impact their lands, their territories, and resources. The fact is that our governments do not have the free, prior and informed consent of our people to proceed with deep sea mining in the Pacific Ocean, nor in areas beyond national jurisdictions. There is no scenario in which deep sea mining is permissible. If it's not safe in our exclusive economic zones, it's not safe in the Pacific as a whole, and therefore not safe for the world. A total ban on deep sea mining is the only way to ensure the integrity of the ocean, which is the heart of our planet. And so we call for recognition that as our common heritage, the ocean demands our common responsibility for its protection. We call on Pacific leaders to join the growing rank of governments, scientific authorities, civil society, and global leaders and indigenous groups all over the world, opposing the rush to mine the ocean floor, and in doing so, destroy our common heritage. We welcome the imposition by some Pacific governments of a moratorium on deep sea mining, but we strongly urge all of our governments to move beyond their exclusive economic zones and support a global ban on deep sea mining. Thank you for your attention.
Incredible. A very strong statement coming through from the Pacific Conference of Churches on behalf of the Pacific Regional Civil Society 2, from my fellow voyager, Reverend James Bhagwan. I have the privilege now to introduce our friend, and I would like to take a moment to just let everyone that is participating in the session know that there is an interpretation button on your screen. Jean-Yves will be speaking in his language, and we have interpretation facilities, so please take advantage of those. I had the great honor to meet Jean-Yves last evening. Jean-Yves Poedi is the chief of the Yani tribe, the Yari tribe of the clan of the Neoyo tribe, and spokesperson of the Agie Ao Customary Authority, which brings together over 50 tribes and all Kanak chiefs from the region. Jean-Yves is from a commune in a region that has been nickel mining for 115 years in New Caledonia. I do apologize for my pronunciation, Jean-Yves, but I ask for you to go ahead and proceed with your presentation. Thank you. Merci.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes, tous ceux qui, de près ou de loin, travaillent autour du sujet qui nous tient d'actualité, qui nous tient à cœur. Et je vais profiter de l'espace qui m'est accordé pour parler aussi d'avancer la vision Kanak sur l'océan. D'abord, je vais parler des pollutions, de l'impact négatif des mines de nickel ici en Calédonie, parce que ça a un lien avec le monde marin. Donc, ces extractions minières de nickel ici en Calédonie impactent fortement l'environnement, qui est rejailli sur l'économique et le social. Donc, l'environnement, c'est d'abord là où on va planter tout ce qu'on mange, qui va être pollué par cette épaisseur de terre latérité qui sort des montagnes à cause de l'extraction de minerais, qui va aussi suivre le long des rivières et impacter les trous d'eau, les gravats qui remplissent les trous d'eau, mais aussi sur les berges qui vont s'effondrer au fur et à mesure que les inondations arrivent, mais aussi parce que sur ces berges-là, il y a aussi des plantes médicinales. Donc, ça impacte terriblement le milieu mélangien. Alors, on a parlé de l'engravement des lits de rivière, du dépôt important dans les baies et sur les récifs qui longent les plages de notre pays. Dès qu'on a un peu de vent ou qu'on a de fortes pluies, on aura tout le long de la côte où j'habite, la côte est, une couleur rougeâtre qui justement ressort des sédiments qui sont laissés par les courants. et qui vont venir. Il y a des récifs chez nous qui sont morts, définitivement morts, où il y a aussi des poissons qui disparaissent, des crustacés. Donc l'impact environnemental de ce côté-là, il est quand même assez criant, assez flagrant. Et ça ne s'arrête pas là, ça va malheureusement continuer, la pollution, jusqu'au récif barrière qui est là où je suis, en moyenne 10 km de chez moi, mais qui va impacter jusque-là. C'est pour dire que tout cet écosystème côtier jusque le large, eh bien, il est impacté par cette pollution minière. La vision culturelle kanak que je voulais amener pour la deuxième partie, c'est forcément qu'on est lié. On est lié dans le milieu kanak, on est lié à l'océan, comme on est lié à la forêt. Donc, je dirais, pour illustrer la chose, de dire qu'il y a chez nous des clans de responsables de la mer qui ont des totems, par exemple, qui sont requins, qui sont baleines, qui sont serpents, et qui ont un rôle, c'est de préserver cet environnement-là. Ça veut dire que dans l'organisation sociale kanak, il y a les responsables, ce que je dis là. Et ceux qui gèrent le milieu marin, par exemple, vont diriger les pêches pour dire que on va, dans un temps défini, éviter de faire des prélèvements à cet endroit-là. Par contre, on va nous ouvrir d'autres endroits pour toujours garder cet équilibre et ne pas prendre à outrance. Et en dernier, je vais être très court, je voudrais aussi interpeller par le message. Je dis tout à l'heure, je profite de l'espace qui m'est offert pour parler de l'endroit. Le monde sous-marin, c'est l'endroit où va l'esprit des morts. Hein, dans le monde kanak, quand la personne arrive en fin de vie, on dit que son esprit va rejoindre le monde marin, le monde sous-marin, le monde des morts. Donc, espérer que cela soit toujours gardé et maintenu. Je veux dire que supposer que si demain il y a de l'extraction, que ce soit minérale ou autre, dans les fonds marins, imaginez un seul instant, quand je parle de pollution, de mines, imaginez un peu dans le fond marin notre incapacité à gérer les problèmes qui pourraient survenir demain et après-demain si on se met à exploiter nos fonds marins. Et je voulais interpeller pour finir les responsables des États du Pacifique, des États indépendants, des États membres, des ONG, des associations, de tous ceux qui gravitent autour de nos océans, de prendre les bonnes décisions qui n'auront pas d'impact majeur sur l'environnement, sur les différents écosystèmes marins, pour qu'on puisse assurer demain léguer en tout cas à nos enfants et petits-enfants quelque chose de bien, de propre. Donc, quelle que soit la décision, quel que soit le travail en commun qui va être fait d'ici là demain, à tous ces responsables politiques et environnementaux du pays du Pacifique, le souhait, c'est ça, c'est de vous accorder sur quelque chose qui va au-delà des intérêts immédiats, j'allais dire, mais qui va beaucoup plus loin en pensant à l'avenir de nos mers. Donc, nous avons la chance d'avoir le plus grand océan dans ce monde qui est l'océan Pacifique. Essayons d'être exemplaires, de préserver tous ces écosystèmes-là pour pouvoir transmettre à nos enfants et petits-enfants demain quelque chose de bien. Voilà, en tout cas, ceci est un soutien déjà aux travaux déjà effectués par nos responsables politiques ici dans le pays, les ONG et les environnementalistes, une contribution en tout cas de l'ère Aguiaro, hein, qui va venir se mettre à côté des décideurs pour les encourager à prendre les bonnes décisions pour notre avenir et surtout de nos enfants demain et après-demain. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Johnny Puedi. Merci beaucoup also to the interpreters that have joined us today. It was important to have a voice about cultural values and one that understands the impacts of land mining, having had that for more than 100 years in that area. Now would like to introduce everyone to Pelene Tita Kara. Tita is the campaign coordinator for DSM for the Civil Society Forum of Tonga. We'll hear about recent consultations that have taken place with the communities in Tonga. Tita, please welcome. Maloelele.
Maloa Pito Tina, and welcome to everyone in the house. I'm happy to be with you today and share some of the experience that Civil Society Forum Tonga has experienced over the past 8 years. The Civil Society Forum of Tonga is the umbrella NGO hosting over 150 community groups, as well as 38 CSO and NGOs. I have to acknowledge the EU SPC project that first gave the Civil Society Forum of Tonga its first space in the deep sea mining discussion in 2012. And we have been involved in the dialogue. While a lot of people will be debating the effectiveness of the EU deep sea mining project, I have to acknowledge that it was through this project that we got to dialogue about deep sea mining, having our voice and our concern being tabled, and have our first Pacific networking and our first campaign to actually halt and arrest and totally ban the deep sea mining industry in our EEZ zone. Tonga is a sponsoring state for Tonga Offshore Mining Limited. Tapawa Tomald, to most, was the affiliates of Nautilus Company back in 2018. And until recently, in 2019, when Nautilus went bankrupt, Deep Green is now the owner of Tonga Offshore Mining Limited. There's a lot of misinformation and unbalanced information that have been shared with the people of Tonga, and Civil Society Forum has been working and campaigning urgently to actually find the right information and share those with the people. We can confirm that Damald is negotiating a contract with the government and it's not signed. So our effort and dialogue and campaigning activities is centralizing in trying to sensitize the government to the impact of deep sea mining and trying to ensure that the government think twice about signing that contract, and hopefully they would not proceed with the renewal of the contract with Tomald. In the 3rd of November this year, we hosted the first ever national inter-island and multi-sectorial consultation across the 5 main islands of Tonga out of the 6, whereby we give spaces for people in the community to talk about this issue of deep sea mining. The Prime Minister of Tonga was the guest of honor, and he did support Tonga's, the civil society's objective in trying to safeguard our ocean as a source of livelihood for more than 80% of our people. The result from the national consultation came back as a resounding loud no to deep sea mining. The recommendation from across the island is no to deep sea mining in our EEZ and no to deep sea mining in the area. So as a result of this loud objection from the islands, the Civil Society Forum of Tonga hosted a meeting yesterday actually, and now have revised its position to say total ban to deep sea mining. We are currently completing a statement that will go to the Prime Minister of Tonga, as well as the Minister of Land and Survey, who is mandated to awarding, renewing contract for deep sea mining activities. We have now confirmed our position to say no to deep sea mining, both in the EEZ zone and as well as the area. The ocean is too important for us as our livelihood. So we are saying, save our ocean, save our life. Thank you.
Thank you, Pilina Titakara. That was incredible. It's wonderful to see the awareness and community engagement throughout the Pacific. We appreciate the work that Civil Society Forum of Tonga is doing. We are now going to finish up with hearing from Honorable Ralph Regenvanu, currently the leader of the opposition in Vanuatu. Minister Regenvanu has previously held a number of ministerial portfolios, including Minister for Mines and Minerals from 2013 to 2017. We welcome you and we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. I want to just share for our audience my experience as the minister on this issue of deep sea mining. And maybe it can have some instruction or something to learn for other countries. I've been an MP for a while, a term before I became Minister responsible for land, natural resources, including minerals, in early 2013. And it so happened there was a regional deep sea mining workshop organized in Port Vila shortly after I became minister, which our illustrious chairlady was present. And at that time, I sort of had to look into the issue and find out, what's the situation that I want to. I had no idea before that we'd issued any licenses for prospecting or anything like that, like 99% of citizens. And what I actually discovered as a minister, I was able to access, of course, all the files. And I actually discovered that there were, at that time, 145 seabed mineral prospecting licenses issued and alive. And it was very disconcerting to me because I'd been an MP for, half a decade, and I didn't know anything about the fact that these licenses existed, and no one else did as well. And so I made it a point at the opening of that workshop to announce this, and to also announce the fact that because no one knew about it, it was important that we engage in a much more consultative process to see what people think about this idea of deep sea mining as responsible leaders. We need to, act on behalf of the public, in the public interest, and we need to know what the public thinks about this. And so I initiated a large national consultation. So in Vanuatu, we have a very well-used model of consultation that we use, which is the government in association with relevant NGOs goes out to the different provinces. We hold a consultation where we invite representatives from the different civil society groups, which are broadly the chiefs, women leaders, youth leaders, church leaders, and then you have sometimes the private sector, people with disabilities as a key kind of groups that have to be involved in all these consultations. We do one in the provincial center, and then one or two outside the provincial center in random villages that are selected for that process. And then you sort of get people's views on this. And we did this for a number of reforms that we did, the land reform, and it's kind of a generally used model of policy development and consultation in Vanuatu. And at the end of it, we had a wrap-up, as you normally do, a wrap-up conference to bring all the participants from the different provinces that have been involved to then present what they came up with in their areas and then come up with a national position. So that happened by that time it had been about a year, in October 2014. And basically the national position was the National Council of Women wanted nothing to do with deep sea mining and even boycotted the whole thing. And so we was not even discuss this as the representatives of the women of Vanuatu. We just don't want to even talk about this. It's no, full stop. The other groups were also very cautious about the fact of lack of government capacity to enforce and monitor and implement existing laws, let alone if we were going to start doing a whole new area. That was one of the main concerns. Of course, the cultural and environmental ties cannot be overemphasized in Vanuatu, like the rest of the Pacific. And so the outcome was basically that people said, you know, we're not ready to do this yet. We don't think it's something that we can do right now, and we shouldn't do it. We need to learn from the experience of other countries, because at that time, Nautilus was still operational in Papua New Guinea. So let's see what happens there first. And then that became the national position, is we're not going to do it. We're going to wait and see what happens. And if there is at all any possibility, it's going to be way down the track. We're not so interested in right now. And I then became foreign minister for the last 2 years before I became leader of the opposition this year. And I was at the meeting where the foreign minister, I think it was the prime minister of Papua New Guinea said that Papua New Guinea was interested in a moratorium on deep sea mining. And this was after the Nautilus experiment had failed. And at that time, representing our government, I said the same thing. I said, look, we're interested in also in a moratorium. And that is our national position as of the beginning of this year. And I suppose the point of what I'm saying is that, as we can see with Tonga, the presentation we just saw, if you consult people in a genuine manner, in a way that you want to actually find out what they think, to come up with an informed decision about how people want the government to deal with their resources environment, I think we will find that the people of the Pacific are not ready for deep sea mining, do not want deep sea mining. And I think that's something we saw echoed by the Reverend Bhagwan in his presentation. Also, in fact, all the presentations on this panel. And it's very important for, like, I'm a member of parliament, I'm a politician. It's very important for politicians, members of parliament, to take on board. I mean, unfortunately, in our democratic system, it doesn't actually work that way, that you're actually forced to consider and take on people's views, but that's what we should be doing as proper leaders. And make sure that we get all people informed of all the aspects of all the issues surrounding deep sea mining, environmental, social, economic impacts. The fact that we know very little because nothing's been done, basically, so it's a totally experimental venture. And then bring these to the table and put them into policy. So Vanuatu became the first country in the Pacific to have a national oceans policy, which basically echoes what was found in the consultation. And we look forward to continuing to make sure that we're kept abreast of what's happening in this area. And I think we need to be much more courageous in the international diplomacy field, especially at the International Seabed Authority and so on, to make sure that the views of our constituents, especially the grassroots people in the Pacific, continue to be represented by us as national leaders. So I think that's all I'll say on that issue, Tina. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. That was incredible to hear from someone who's in the political sphere, very active in that space, and how it can be done, and the outcomes of genuine consultation and communities being informed. Thank you for sharing that with us. We have some questions that are coming through, and I'd like to ask Tita, actually, there was just a point of clarification on what you were speaking about which contract were you referring to that Tonga has not yet signed or renewed?
Thank you, Taina. The contract I'm referring to is the one between the government and Tonga Offshore Mining Limited. Previously, in 2008, they signed the contract between the government and Nautilus, who then was the owner of Tumult. Now the new owner is Deep Green. That contract between the government and Deep Green, the new owner of Tumult, has not been signed. The funny thing about it is Deep Green, now being the new owner, the CEO was the former CEO of Nautilus. So in a sense, it's like a renewed, re-signed new contract. Same people, different names. Hope that answered the question.
I believe it would have, just in reference, that does give it more clarity. There's a question here for our panelists. It says, what do you see as the role of regional organizations in managing the DSM industry, and if how it proceeds in the Pacific? Is there someone on our panel that has a response to that, perhaps?
Maybe I'll respond. I think SPC is doing what it should be doing, which is providing scientific evidence knowledge base in terms of the science, in terms of regulation. There's been a lot of comment from civil society about the fact that the EU is funding that capacity in the SPC, which is a conflict of interest. The forum obviously is the place where the political decisions need to be made. But I think SPREP also has a very important role to play in terms of an environmental baseline for what will be the effects of deep sea mining across jurisdictions. Because as we heard about, particularly things like plumes and so on, these things will go for a long distance, possibly over national borders. And so there's a need for a regional environmental organization like SPREP to look into the environmental baseline, which we don't have, I must say, at this stage.
Ralph, could I just follow on real quick with a question in terms of the regional leadership and how any of these institutions and also different governments can take into account civil society views on DSM? Is it just further to your genuine consultation? Can you see emerging more of civil society into the conversation, even on the regional level?
We would hope so. I think it requires much more reform of political processes in individual states. There needs to be much more political reform in terms of allowing for a greater democracy in our Pacific Island countries.
May I ask, I've got a question here, Jean-Yves. There's a question for you asking if you could please share the relationship of the Kanak people with the ocean. In particular, the clans whose totems are marine animals, including in your area. Interpretation button for most.
Merci. Donc, les relations du monde kanak vers le monde marin, je disais tout à l'heure que c'est très lié parce que tout ce que nous faisons en terre a un lien forcément avec le milieu marin. Et le monde kanak est pas un monde à part du monde marin. Il est lié, et puis voilà, pour dire exactement, on est lié comment? On est lié par, je disais tout à l'heure, les responsabilités qu'on a chacun envers cet environnement marin. Donc, on parlait des plans de la mer, on parlait des tabous. Il y a des lieux tabous, il y a des endroits où c'est interdit d'aller en mer. Il y a des, comme je disais tout à l'heure, des poissons qui ont un lien avec les gens de la mer, comme on dit, le plan de la mer. Donc, tout ça, c'est un lien. Et puis, on se réfère toujours aussi, comme aussi bien dans nos forêts qu'en mer, à tout cet environnement-là dont nous faisons partie, de toujours trouver cet équilibre-là. On est toujours là en symbiose avec, pour ne pas que le prélèvement, par exemple, qu'on va faire dans le milieu marin, va déséquilibrer quelque part. Donc, il est important de s'associer. Chez nous, par exemple, le requin, on ne le prend pas. Par contre, c'est le totem d'un clan. On s'associe à ça, on se sent dedans, on est intégré dans le milieu, on fait partie de ce milieu-là, comme des milieux de la forêt. Donc, il n'y a pas de distance, il n'y a pas de différence entre nous, les Kanaks, et le monde de la mer comme le monde de la forêt.
Okay, merci, Jean-Yves. Merci for your response. I would like to add, there's a number of questions coming through, everyone. There is some dialogue in the chat in response to some of the questions that are happening. In terms of, there's a question on if a moratorium was followed through to allow more time for research on the deep sea, the potential impacts of the industry and the potential impacts on the industry, who would ideally fund this research? And that Honorable Ralph Ridgen-Vanu has made a comment. I'd like to take the opportunity to just interject in terms of a portion of the request for a moratorium was to support the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And so much of the effort and efforts and expertise throughout the Pacific can be directed to building that initiative and being a part of that particular initiative and working with the UN to achieve getting the funding that's required, make sure that our scientists, our people in STEM are involved, our current people who are employed in all of the different government departments are also involved. There's so much opportunity to align with a global initiative, and funding would be a part of that. So that is just one spectacular means of being able to do something of that manner. And this is, going to have a whole decade to really try to find out more about the deepest depths. It's an opportunity not to be missed. So I would like to just be a part of that question and answer. There's a lot of answers. Sorry, everyone. I'm just going through. There's questions and answers coming through. For example, there's a question for Ralph. Do you have active environmental NGOs in Vanuatu that are also included in the consultation process? I'll let you answer that, but from what you had said, it seems that you would have. There's another one for Ralph, is the current government in Vanuatu maintaining the same position in regards to the moratorium? If you don't mind just addressing those two, Ralph.
Okay, so regarding the current government, I'm not sure at this stage. A policy position hasn't been announced, which tends to mean the existing policy still applies, but we'll see. In terms of environmental groups, there aren't really any nationally strong environmental groups, but there are many regional groups. And one of the key advocates is actually the the National Council of Women and National Council of Chiefs. And they're very strong civil society groups, and they generally tend to be environmental advocates, and they are always involved in the consultation. There are smaller environmental groups also that exist now, as I said, on a regional level. But they don't, I suppose we don't use them too much in consultation. They become attendees in the consultation rather than participants in putting out the consultation. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. We're coming to the end, and we've already come to the end of our session. And I'm quite impressed how well we've done with the time. I thank our speakers. I thank our organizers. I thank you all for listening in. There's maybe one or two more questions that I seem to have been answered in the chat. If not, we must make a way to be accessible to everyone that has been involved in this panel. I have a deep gratitude, Pacific Nature Conference, Phil McCabe, Sean Owen, thank you for helping to organize this particular session. To Dr. Diva Amon, Reverend James Bagwan. We have Jean-Yves Poidi that was here, Pelanatitsa Kara, Honorable Ralph Regin Vandu. Thank you all for being a part of this very important conversation, and let it continue and ensure that from all of this information, we make the best decisions for not just ourselves, but the ocean, because that is what is powering us. Thank you for joining. Kia ora e kia manuia.
Thanks, everyone.
Merci et au revoir.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Thank you. Goodbye.